The victory of Donald Trump in the presidential election is a massive victory for the right across the Western world. It changes, from our point of view, our economy, our thinking about security, and the cultural conversation that we all inhabit.
Hey, look what happened. Is this crazy?
And this is not just a victory about borders or immigration or defence or the conventional stuff. This is also the victory of what you might call the traditional male head of household politics, the traditional Christian worldview about the role of women, the role of the family.
This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
Politically, it is a massive adrenaline shot for nationalism or nationalist insurgency all around the West, whether that's Viktor Orban in Hungary or the various European nationalisms, or whether it's here at home with Reform and UKIP. There's no point in hiding away from this. This is very good news for them.
This is the most incredible political comeback in any of our lifetime.
But it's also very easy to forget the cultural effects of this. Donald Trump won with some very, very strong traditional patriarchal messages about gender, about the family, about religion, about migration. All of those things, all of those conversations will be infected by what has happened.
I will rescue every city and town that has been invaded and conquered. These towns have been conquered, they have been invaded.
So in terms of Britain, I think there are three things that we need to talk about pretty much immediately. One is economy. One is defence and security, and the third is, as it were, the cultural conversation and personal relationships between Britain and America. Let me start with the economy, because what Trump wants to do on tariffs will hit us as a relatively medium-sized, remarkably open economy very hard indeed. The experts talk about at least a 4% hit on our total export-import trade. We're talking about a 1% hit on GDP growth, which, looking forward, is already really, really dismal. So I think this hammers a lot of the numbers and the assumptions that Rachel Reeves had in her recent budget. If you look at what Trump wants to do in terms of tariffs domestically in America, that will certainly increase inflation. All the experts I've been talking to, all the economists, say that this is going to be an inflationary moment around the West. We're going to see higher inflation. That's going to affect living standards, of course, in the UK as well. Add to that the fact that on security, when Trump talks about wanting much more of a contribution from other NATO countries, when he talks about wanting to do a deal with Russia over Ukraine, we are certainly going to have to spend more than we are on our own defence. There is no money for that in the budget at the moment. So you take the defence problem, you take inflation, you take the hit that's going to happen if Trump goes ahead with tariffs. And it's very, very tough news for the Labour Party when it comes to economics and their central message. They've always said, we are going to be a growth government. It's going to be much, much harder after Trump's win.
This budget will permanently increase the supply capacity of the economy, boosting long-term growth.
So let's turn more directly to the other obvious and immediate issue, which is security. Trump has said again and again that he can end the war in Ukraine on a single day, within 24 hours, if he becomes president.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. And it will take me no longer than one day.
I was talking this week to Sergei Markov, who's a professor of politics in Moscow State University and a former advisor to President Putin. And he said that Putin expects to get a call very, very soon from President-elect Trump asking him for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. And the same call will go, of course, to Zelensky. And that would be the precondition for Trump effectively imposing some kind of peace deal on both sides. Now, we don't know whether that's going to be possible, but we do know, roughly speaking, the peace deal that Trump would do. Vladimir Putin talks about the realities on the ground, by which he means Russia keeps all those parts of eastern Ukraine in the Donbass and Crimea it has already seized. And there is a kind of line of armistice down the middle of Ukraine. That is, I think, what Trump will be going for, and there'll be lots of inducements on both sides for that to happen. And, of course, the danger for us and for the West is that by slicing a third off Ukraine, that makes Zelensky's position completely impossible. We have political turmoil, possibly some kind of revolution in what's left of Ukraine. And in that turmoil, Russia simply takes the rest. And then it's on the borders of Moldova, and it's pushing against the actual NATO front line, Poland and the Baltics. And we are in a very, very dangerous world at a time when the American president has said very clearly that he is not going to necessarily support NATO countries if they're not spending enough on defense in the way they expect.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
In other words, he's taking away that Article 5 nuclear protection. It's a very dangerous world. And I think in that world, it's inevitable that Britain is going to have to spend more in defense. There is going to be a conversation now about, with America pulling back, does Britain move in and try to support Ukraine in its military struggle against Russia, more or less by ourselves? I don't know. I think that would be an extremely dangerous and perilous thing for us to do, but that is going to be part of the conversation ahead. I think those are the absolutely urgent conversations on economics, how do we make the numbers work, and on defence that's going on in Whitehall right now.
I didn't even know what the hell NATO was too much before, but it didn't take me long to figure it out, like about 2 minutes.
So how do Labour deal with this? Well, first of all, not panicking is a very important thing to do. It is possible that although Trump says that tariffs are his favourite word in the dictionary, and although the Trump-Vance economic plan, very much aimed at American workers and at the American trade unions, does require tariffs to rebuild, reshore a lot of American manufacturing, despite the inflationary impact of that, it is just possible that he's not going to go nearly as far as he has said on tariffs.
100% tariffs, and if that's not high enough, I'll make it 200%.
It is possible that he looks at the EU, which he detests, and Britain, which he detests less, and does some kind of deal with us, so that our tariff wall is much lower than the EU's, and we don't do too badly out of that. So there is a lot of economic negotiation ahead, and much of this is very personal.
I come to the leader of the opposition.
I thought it was really interesting in the Commons that this week the new leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, chose to repeat what David Lammy had said many years ago about Donald Trump, that he was a Nazi sympathizer and a xenophobe and all the rest of it. Quite clearly trying to remind Trump and the people around him, remind the President-elect of the United States of the worst things that a British politician had recently said about him.
Did the Foreign Secretary take that opportunity to apologise for making derogatory and scatological references, including, and I quote, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order.
Now, that can only be to cause embarrassment to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, to try to persuade Keir Starmer to sack his Foreign Secretary as a result of those things. It is for domestic political purposes to infuriate Washington, which seems to me, I have to say, the absolute example of putting party first and country second. I didn't like the way that the Labour Party treated Kemi Badenoch in the Commons. They tried to shout her down effectively. That was pretty disgraceful.
All that he is doing,
I'm going to hear the question.
But I thought the way that she treated those Lammy comments was not patriotic. So this takes us to the personal relationships between Starmer and Lammy and the team around Trump and Trump himself. Now, there's a lot being made in London of a dinner in September between Keir Starmer and David Lammy and Trump and his people in Trump Tower. And they're even excited by the fact that Trump himself offered seconds to Starmer and to Lammy. This is the way diplomacy is done these days. But it does seem to me that Trump and Starmer have the beginnings of quite a good personal relationship, which you might think is very, very weird, because one is a very far to the right, and one is a social democrat, European social democrat. And Trump hates European social democrats. But Trump respects strength and stability. And he knows perfectly well, because you can see the numbers, that Starmer is going to be there for at least 4.5 years. Starmer is going to be somebody he is dealing with throughout his presidency. And therefore, there is a very strong motive for Trump to keep Starmer on side as well. We also know that Trump loathes the European Union. He dislikes Macron in particular. He dislikes Olaf Scholz. And so anybody who is not part of that, but is sort of in that part of the world, is going to be quite attractive to Trump. David Lammy has been working very, very hard on other people around Trump, including the likely defense secretary, and also the vice president, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance and David Lammy share the experience of a very, very tough largely fatherless upbringing. And they apparently bonded very closely about that, and they've got a genuinely good personal relationship. So we shouldn't assume that things are going to be really bad in personal terms. And Whitehall is doing everything it can at the moment to keep it that way. So I want to turn to some of the other political consequences of the Trump victory, the Trump triumph, because they are quite serious. So, for instance, Trump got his victory very much on the border issue. He wants to round up illegal migrants, put them into camps, and deport them.
And we will put the vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them the hell out of our country as fast as we can.
That is going to have an effect on all those European and British politicians who are obsessed by migration already. You can see that the sort of pseudo-intellectuals who talk about nothing else. You can see the politicians who are endlessly harping on the borders and migration, send them back, come out of the international treaties that stop us doing that. That worldview, that perspective is going to be a bit supercharged by Trump in the White House. Something similar, I'm afraid, is going to happen on the environment and global warming. Trump is a deep skeptic, as we know. He wants to drill, he wants to produce cheap energy for the American economy with oil and gas.
I will end Kamala's war on American energy, and we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill.
How much harder, I wonder, is it therefore going to be for Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband to sell the idea of the great green transition in the UK if there are costs associated with that for consumers, and times are hard and government budgets are tight, and the Americans are doing exactly the opposite? It makes that debate much, much harder as well. And when it comes to those issues which have obsessed campuses in the United States and here, on race, on gender, on class to a certain extent, I think all of those things are going to be affected by having, as it were, the triumph of the male household, the patriarchy in Washington. Trump there with Elon Musk on one side and J.D. Vance on the other. If you were trying to do a caricature of what the patriarchy might feel like in this year, then I think Trump, with what he has said about women.
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not.
J.D. Vance, a very, very devout Roman Catholic with a very, very traditional view of the family and the role of women.
We're effectively run in this country by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
Elon Musk, the ultimate tech bro, with what he said, then it would look a bit like that. And I think that is going to influence the conversation here as well.
The entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
So if we think about the UK, the world out there is just a little colder and a little scarier than it was a week ago. We seem like a liberal or social democratic outlier surrounded by countries forging ahead in a much more right-wing, so-called populist way. And that is going to make life much harder. I think everything becomes harder for Keir Starmer as a result of that. But there is no point in giving up or walking away. He is doing his level best to rebuild relationships with the Trump White House and to think about how he can economically weather this next storm that's coming. There was the old phrase by Gramsci about pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, and I think there was never a more appropriate moment for it than now.